Welcome, everybody. Great to have you along. Great to see so many familiar names in the attendees list, as well as some new registrants as well. We're looking forward to introducing today, providing a little taster to our new tool, the Event Learning Review. So I'm going to assume that there's some people in the group here today who have some fairly substantial knowledge already of HOP, of operational learning, things like learning teams. So for some of you, some of this is going to be fairly basic. So for some of you, it's all going to be new. So either way, I want to try and pitch it so everyone's got something they can take away. One of the things that probably you've noticed already is a kind of a global shift happening in the way we approach and think about safety. One of the real significant shifts with HOP and with all of the new view approaches to safety is there really is a much larger focus, a much greater focus on learning. And this really means that we're shifting from maybe an investigation mindset to a learning mindset. Why is that shift important? Well, I think there's many reasons why it's important. But just from the outset, it's kind of probably something we've all thought about, but it needs to be said. Who does investigations? Who wants to be investigated? And how often do investigations really lead to genuine learning and improvement? It's with those kind of questions in mind that many people, not just HOPLAB, have really been looking for new tools and new approaches to really get better learning when things go wrong. So let's just take a relatively simple oh crap moment, which you would hope would lead to learning. Now, this is an aviation example, and aviation would have you believe that we're great at learning. We learn when things go wrong and we improve and we get better all the time. Well, when we have a smoking hole in the ground, aviation does a really good job of learning. Below the smoking hole in the ground, how good are we at learning? Well, that kind of depends. So this oh crap moment happened to an operator here in Australia in a remote part of the Northern Territory. So what was the oh crap moment? Well, the oh crap moment happened when a member of the ground staff was moving a set of stairs. You've all seen mobile stairs at an airport, and the mobile stairs collided with the leading edge of the wing, damaged the leading edge of the wing, leading to significant damage and, of course, expense, as well as inconvenience for the passengers and the crew. So not real great. Now, this kind of event is not uncommon in the aviation industry. But of course, when an event like this happens, there has to be some form of investigation. Now, how much do we learn from an event like this? What are the findings? Well, the findings that came from this particular event are probably not going to surprise you because they sound very much like the findings that come from almost any other event. Take, for example, this first point, non-compliance with regulatory requirements. Is that really a learning? Do we need to do an investigation to establish that? How about the second one? Failure to follow document control processes with respect to staff access to the manual suite. Again, that might be an interesting thing to have noted. Maybe it's not even that interesting in honesty. What's the relevance of the document control process to the event of the set of stairs hitting the leading edge of a wing? Staff not adequately trained. Well, that's almost self-evidently true after an event, or it can be seen to be self-evidently true. Almost every event we've ever seen, almost every investigation will always have some reference to either training or supervision or both. And of course, there it is, item number 4, lack of adequate supervision of the team staff. I would contest that these things are not really learning. When I picked up that investigation report first time round some years back now, I remember thinking, well, is this it? Where's the learning? I don't understand anything about the actual event. I don't understand the context. I don't understand why it made sense for the person to do what they were doing. And the actions that come out from these types of learnings really aren't going to prevent that kind of event from happening again, nor are they going to improve the work. If we took that approach, maybe there's all types of upsides, not beyond just preventing the same event from happening again. So as experienced safety people, I'm sure I don't have to convince you that these so-called common causes are everywhere. Take the left-hand side column here. These causes, which are seen in so many investigations. Operators didn't follow procedure. They didn't know about the procedures. There were inadequate procedures or inadequate supervision, or maybe inadequate training. Or, as I saw recently in an event, an operator knowingly broke the rule or didn't follow the procedure. They chose to. Well, if these are the causes, these fairly obvious causes, they tend to then also be accompanied by fairly obvious fixes. Well, if they didn't follow the procedure, just remind them to follow the procedure. Or in more extremists, blame them, blame, shame, retrain, which we've seen, of course. Send them a reminder, plead with them, please do this in future, maybe write or improve the procedure or supervision. One I saw recently, a particular client, they had a lot of references to counsel the employee. That's the first time I'd seen that one, but in a more recent case, a corrective action, I kid you not, was the worker promised not to do it again. These really aren't sustainable fixes or improvements, but that's not really surprising because the learning to begin with is probably really quite inadequate. So why do we have this kind of self-perpetuating system across all different types of organizations, across all different industries that seem to be coming up with these same causes and then coming up with the same types of fixes? Well, I think there's a variety of reasons. I think partly it's down to bad habit and tradition, things that have just become ingrained in us that we do. We have systems and metrics that drive particular outcomes. These systems and metrics often are driving more towards action rather than learning. We have too much activity in many organizations, too many investigations, too many reviews, too many of everything. And then, of course, we have a trade-off in terms of quality versus quantity. But I also think there's a problem with the model. Many of the models that we use today really are more interested in consistency of the approach or consistency of categorization of findings. Again, this doesn't lend itself to good learning. So you're probably wondering, what is this alphabet soup on the top of the slide here? So what that stands for is what you look for is what you find. And then accompanying that, what you find is what you fix. What's that got to do with the slide that's here? Well, what many investigations begin to look like, it's investigation by numbers or painting by numbers. So who was it this time? Well, it was, maybe take your pick, it was John, it was Jim, it was Percy, it was Doris, and they were harmed while carrying out that particular activity. What was the unsafe act? Well, we can put that in place. What was the failed precondition or the failed defensive barrier? What's the contributing factor, and what's the ultimate organizational factor? We get one of them, we get one of them, we get one of them, we get one of them. Up, and there we go. We've completed a successful investigation. Well, we've ticked the boxes and we've adhered to the prescribed approach to how we're supposed to be doing the investigation. But what have we learned? Now, I don't say this is necessarily a problem with the models. The models are a function of the time when they were first put together, and they were part of moving us away from maybe just blaming the person at the front line. But I think now, whereas in the past they were maybe an enabler for us, today they're becoming more of a constraint for us. They are making us too tunnel visioned around what is it we want to go and look at, what is it we want to go and see, what is it we're kind of trying to learn about. So it really is driving this, what you look for is what you find. If you're trying to find one of them, one of them, one of them, well, you can be almost certain you'll find one of them, one of them, one of them. And we kind of see the results of that today. So we need to kind of move away from the what you look for is what you find to kind of more of a model of curiosity and interest, going and understanding the messy reality of work. Because that messy everyday reality of work is there all the time. And sometimes it leads to an event. And oftentimes it doesn't. Oftentimes it just leads to success. And the messiness is all part of the process. So we need to get comfortable with the messiness and need to get more curious, more interested, and more interested in learning, moving beyond the kind of the constraints of the systems we've been using up until this point. So what is event learning review? Well, it is a tool. It is just one tool, and there are many that are emerging at this time that are helping organizations to get better at learning, both from normal work, but also when events happen. So what's learning review? There's a lot of text here. So I'm going to just kind of paraphrase some of this. An event learning review, the tool that we've come up with is really is a direct replacement for traditional investigations. So it allows greater flexibility than investigations typically do, because they have a very defined process. This is how you do this. You step 1, step 2, step 3. This is the categorization tool. This is where you're going to organize the data and so on. So it's more free-flowing than that. It's working with complexity and messiness, and it's designed to allow us to learn from incidents or accidents in a way that is kind of partnering with and empowering those who do the work. The foundation, obviously, is the HOP principles and kind of all of the kind of key ideas and concepts that go along with that. So we've been working in the HOP space since 2017. We've been helping organizations run and build capacity to do learning teams since 2017. This is not a replacement for learning teams. But the critical point is, I personally don't believe learning teams are always their ideal replacement for investigations. So learning teams are complemented by event learning review. And that's the critical point. We are looking to add to learning teams, and event learning review adds some differences to learning teams, and is still a flexible, practical way of approaching event learning, with maybe out some of the restrictions that we see with learning teams. So what's in a name? Some acknowledgements in here. I think names are important. I think calling an activity we do after an event an investigation immediately gives some people the heebie-jeebies. Some people think of investigations, well, that's something that police do. Who wants to be investigated? Who wants to be part of an investigation? So I think moving away from this idea of we investigate, we find causes, and potentially we blame the people involved. Part of moving away from that is also changing the language to be more focused on learning and improvement. So event learning review, it clearly signposts that we're interested in learning, and in this case, after an event. Work on learning review, must be mentioned, has been done in lots of other settings. So Ivan and the team at the US Forestry Service have done stuff in that space. Adam Johns and his team at Keolis Amy at London Docklands Rail had done work in this space with the term learning review. Likewise, Cathay Pacific. We haven't really based what we're doing in this space on the work that they've done previously. Department of Corrections in New Zealand, a client of Southpac's we've been working with for some time, they engaged us to help them with what they've called their learning review process. And that's been a 12-month project that we've been assisting them with to kind of really enhance their learning processes so they can have this tool, event learning review and learning teams. So the model that we've come up with, this tool, event learning review, is very much based on the work that we've been doing with Department of Corrections and other work that others have been doing, but we're all building on a set of common foundations. The 5 HOP principles and the kind of other ideas and concepts that form this collective new view. So the name, I think, is important. We're interested in learning, and that's right there, right up front in the name. But we're not the only people who are talking about this type of approach. It kind of must be acknowledged. So it's partly technical, event learning review. It's partly some new tools, some new approaches. It's also partly philosophical in its shift. So those of you who have already done training with Southpac will know, can't be a Southpac course without a nod to Erwin Schrödinger. He mentioned here, the task's not so much to see what no one has yet seen, but to think what nobody has yet thought about that which everybody sees. So much of what we're doing in operational learning, it's not going out and having some huge eureka moment, and we've seen something that no one's ever seen before. What we're trying to do is take a new perspective and a new approach at the same types of events, the same types of things that are going on and going wrong in our organization as have been going on for quite some time. So it's the change thinking is part of the change with event learning review, and it's also part of the technical and sort of skills and techniques that we're introducing as well. What are some of those shifts in perspectives? For those who are initiated, work as imagined versus work as done. This has been we've been talking this message for quite some time now, as of lots of other people. Event learning review is very much inclined and working towards understanding that blue line. Sure, we'll look at documentation and so forth, but we're not interested in building out some kind of picture of the world of documentation versus work as done. We're interested in understanding everyday work, the messy context where work as done is created. It's moving away from linear causality. We're not interested in causes or even contributing factors. We're using terminology around themes. What are the key themes that have emerged? Many of you are experienced investigators or have spent time involved in investigations. You will recognize the fact that oftentimes vast amounts of time is spent deciding what to categorize a contributing factor as. Is it this bucket? Is it that bucket? Should it sit here? Should it sit there? Should this code? Whichever model you're using, whether it's HFAX or ICAM or whatever, this large amounts of time can be tied up in this kind of categorization. I don't think any categorization tool can ever really capture all the possible variability of the things that we might find. So we're better just to go with kind of key themes that organically emerge from the learning rather than having a preset set of categorizations which things need to neatly fit into. So we're moving away from a linear causality to a messy story, and whatever emerges from that messy story, well, that's what emerges. We're also shifting away from those kind of fairly simple explanations, which are oftentimes satisfying, but oftentimes wrong. So we're trying to find the messier, deeper underlying story and significance behind an event rather than coming up with a simple explanation. Well, that person just didn't follow procedure. Well, that's generally self-evidently true. People, although it does happen, generally aren't getting injured when they're following procedure. So it's not that interesting to say that's an outcome. We need to get deeper and more involved in the context. No learning tool really would be complete, no webinar would be complete without referencing back to our 5 principles, the foundations. So as with learning teams, event learning review has to be built on a solid foundation of an understanding of HOP and what it's all about. Does that mean we need to have a whole group of people who are completely conversant, can recite the 5 principles, they know the concepts backwards? No. But it does mean an organization has to be working with and seeking to try and understand and act in accordance with these principles. Accepting the fact that people make mistakes, it's not necessarily that there's an inherent flaw in that person. That just means that we're human. Knowing that vast amounts of time and resources figuring out who's to blame is a waste of resources. But resources could be better spent understanding context. Obviously, learning is vital, and the move towards improvement sits very nicely with event learning review and learning teams, whether we're looking proactively, seeking to understand normal work, or looking backwards after an event. Either way, that principle of learning is important. And of course, response matters, particularly from senior leaders, but not just from senior leaders. That's setting the tone, whether it's going to be okay to learn, whether it's going to be okay for people to be honest. So without these principles, there really is no point introducing something new. We've said that for years about learning teams. I don't believe you can do learning teams. You don't have to call it HOP. You don't have to call it these 5 principles. But if you're not trying to build this kind of thinking into your organization, learning teams will be a short-term fad. It won't be a long-term success. And that'll be the same with any other learning tool you're looking to introduce. So what do the phases and steps look like with event learning review? I'm not going to go into any of these in any great detail, but this is what the process looks like. First of all, we have a trigger. So we need to define, when are we going to do event learning review? One of the things I mentioned before is organizations typically, in our experience, do too many investigations. One of the inevitable consequences of doing too many investigations is quality is suffering. So we need to really think about what are the times when it's really going to be beneficial to do this deeper level learning, and what's the trade-off? Of course, the second aspect then is, what is it we're going to seek to try and learn? Who needs to be helping to set this up? Who's involved in the planning to ensure that we don't go down blind alleys? We don't get too fixated on one particular line of inquiry. We want to try and broaden the scope. Learning review itself, well, that's fairly obvious. The learning piece itself, making sense of the information which emerges, and then reporting. And then post-learning review, sharing the findings, actually verifying that the things that they said were going to be done have been done, for one, and secondly, have been effective. That's a really simple statement, but is so often lacking. How often do things get closed out on the promise that someone's going to do something, and then we go back and it's not being done? Or even more likely, it has been done, but it hasn't been effective. So only then at that point is that event learning review closed out. So I'm going to just have a look at just a few of the elements of that process. But the critical piece here is the learn, define, improve, which is exactly common with learning teams. This is the overlaying cycle that we use with learning teams. It's the same sort of cycle building into the event learning review. First phase is critical. It's learning. Understanding both the work, starting with the work and the context, then moving towards the event. It's the same as when we do a learning team. The learning team does not start with the event. It starts with understanding normal work, the context of the event, and then moving towards the event. Again, we all know that when we start with the event itself is fascinating. We can go into all of the kind of nuts and bolts of the event, but then the context gets missed. So it's critical that we start understanding the messiness first and then moving towards the event. Once we've done all that learning, the defining piece really becomes much easier. But again, as this point mentioned down here, the learning drives the analysis, not the other way around. The model shouldn't be driving what we're going to learn about, which is one of the problems with some of our more traditional tools. That really is steering you towards what's going to be interesting, what you're going to go and look at. We learn first, then we define the themes, and then we make those actions. Again, we're trying to avoid what you look for is what you find. We want to be genuinely curious and interested. So we talked about triggers. Any organization, particularly of size, you're going to have processes, you're going to have procedures that define or dictate when event learning is going to happen. So you may have a certain amount of things which become automatic triggers. That's fine. But one of the things that we try and do with our clients is steer them towards this. Sometimes less is more. Alternatively, learning teams may be initiated. And that's one of the things that really is we've built with both Department of Corrections and other clients too, is this kind of, these are complementary tools. One of the powerful things about learning teams is you're getting that immediate engagement and buy-in from the people involved. But at the same time, one of the drawbacks is you need all those people involved. That can be a logistical challenge, it can be a practical challenge, it can be a resourcing challenge, getting the people available in a room for separate sessions, at least 2. This can be challenging in some operational settings. Equally, failures which are maybe very technical in nature, in my experience, aren't always super well suited to a learning team setting. So there's a time and a place for learning teams. Personally, I believe learning teams, the most power you get from them is in when you're using them proactively, seeking to understand, get a greater understanding of work. That's not to say they can't be used for events. Learning teams can also be very useful as a data input into learning review. How do we understand, how do we get a deeper understanding of what normal looks like? Learning teams could be part of that. So one of the things that we would also mention here is what we're seeking to build with event learning review and people who are going to facilitate that, the types of skills and qualities we're looking for in that person are going to be very similar to the kind of skills and qualities we're looking for in a learning team facilitator. So they are highly complementary. The types of questions, the types of thinking, the approach, the ethos that we're looking to build into those people and in that organization are going to naturally lend themselves. So people can very fluidly alternate between whether I'm doing an event learning review, whether I'm doing a learning team, because the types of questions and the approach are going to be very similar. So beyond kind of learning team type activities, what else is happening in the learning stages? Well, all the usual things you'd expect to see in any kind of learning activity. There's going to be some form of documentation review. There are going to be interviews. There are going to be observations. It's more about how are those things done. What's the lens that we are using to do those things? What's the approach that we're taking? We can do those things in a really kind of old school way, and it feels like you're being inspected by the regulator, or by you're having some kind of check by the ATO. No one really likes that approach. Or we kind of do it in a way which is collaborative, building trust, building relationships, and is really getting that engagement and buy-in. So that's one aspect of it, is the approach. The other part is the lens. What is it we're looking for? How are we going to identify those key learnings? I mentioned there's a lot of parallels and overlaps with learning teams. I mentioned one of the things which is common is that starting with context and moving towards an event. Same types of questions that we ask in a learning team are the same types of questions that can be very helpful in event learning review. Starting with trying to understand, what does your work look like? What does a good day look like? What does a bad day look like? Where are the things that are really predictable? Where are the things that are unpredictable? And so on and so forth. Consistently, we've been able to show to people who have both done our training and have also done learning teams with us through experiences. Inevitably, when you focus on the context, you learn so much more than if you'd started with the event and moved back. Sure, you might get little bits and pieces of the context, but you're not going to get that kind of comprehensive understanding. So asking better questions as learning teams is a really important part. Again, when an event has already happened, it's critical we're really seeking to understand the local rationality. We're seeking to work with the person who was involved in the event. Why did it make sense? Why did it make sense to do the things that they did? Of course, we all need to know, with the benefit of hindsight, like, obviously that was going to happen. Why did they not realize that? Why didn't they do something differently? But that is the trap of hindsight. Everything's obvious afterwards. So we have to become way more interested at what were they thinking? What was influencing that way? Why did it make sense to do it? What are the constraints that were kind of maybe forcing their actions that way? It's not to say it's completely beyond bounds that there may be some malevolent actor who's doing things entirely for nefarious reasons, but it tends to be pretty rare. So for the most part, we're seeking to understand that local rationality. Okay, skipping forward to analysis. We mentioned before, this doesn't drive the learning. This is something which we do after the learning has been done. And we think this is a sense-making process, really seeking to understand the event, but also the work. Where coming up with themes is easy, or easier, it's much easier to just for everyone to agree on what some key themes are than it is to decide on what our root cause is or what a contributing factor is. We're putting all that aside and saying, no, we're not interested in what is the cause or what are the contributing factors. What are the key themes that we've learned we can then do something with? If we change those and we take actions appropriate to those themes, what improvement do we see, which will not only help us with this particular event, but will also help us with improving the work just generally. So this is really a much more holistic approach. We're not just on the hook for fixing the event which has already happened. We can't fix the event that's already happened. It's already happened. So yeah, sure, we don't want the event to happen again, but we want to really see this as an opportunity to improve the work generally, not just the event. It kind of goes without saying, there are many, many tools out there already, many analysis tools, many models, and some of them are helpful, some of them are less helpful. Within the training we do introduce AccuMap, not because we're married to AccuMap and think, oh, this is such a great tool. It's just an example of showing once you have really good data, which is the more important piece, how you arrange the data really is up to you. You can use any one of these tools, Stamp, Fram, you can go back to Swiss Cheese or ICAM, AccuMap, and there are other examples too. But the common thing is really, without good data, the model is useless. So our focus is really on that in terms of the learn, define, improve. The learning is the critical piece. So most of the horsepower is deployed in the learning phase, asking the right questions, speaking to the right people, taking the right approach, being curious. That's going to give you the right data to be able to put into your analysis model. And what are the kind of things then that we may see that emerge? We're not necessarily looking for these things, but these are things that we may identify with that data that we have. We may see error traps. We may see goal conflicts. We'll see resourcing and constraints issues. We'll see demands and pressures. We'll see trade-offs. We'll see performance variability, what we might call gaps between workers imagined and workers done. And sure, we'll see some errors and mistakes. But these are all the things that will emerge from the data rather than the things that we are looking for. We've got to have one of these, we've got to have one of those, and so on. So that's the analysis piece. Then we have an improvement and verification. I've skipped out a couple of steps here, but I'm sure you're not that interested in hearing what a report looks like. There is a learning review report that goes along with this process, but you can more or less figure that out for yourself, I'm sure. The key piece here is verification. We were speaking to an organization about 18 months ago that had a fatality. They'd done an investigation on that fatality event. They'd put actions in place. 12 months later, they went back and did a learning team on the same event, and they found that the actions they'd put in place were ineffective, and the exact same fatality event could happen again. Now, that really is quite scary. When we have a fatality event, and even after a comprehensive investigation and actions being put in place, the same event could happen again. So the really critical pieces, especially with an event like that, is then circling back and not only checking, hey, has this been done? That's not that hard to do that bit. You agreed this action was going to be taken. Has it been taken? More critical is it actually working? And that can only really be done through, again, getting back to that frontline people, the people who are owning that action on a day-to-day basis, having to deal with it. Is it effective? But also, what else has this introduced into the work? Has it improved the work? Has it created new challenges? Sometimes the new challenges that are introduced may be as problematic as the original issue we were trying to deal with. So what are the outcomes that we'd like to see from this? Well, for one, we're seeing better learning outcomes, but also we're seeing this as a way to really shift thinking about how things go wrong. And just in the past, we'd ask, how did this event happen? As if the event itself was some kind of impossible aberration. This should never be possible. What we find with the clients we're working with, once we do really good operational learning, whether it's through learning teams, event learning reviews, once they really get that understanding of the challenges of work, they start to begin to ask questions like, how's this not happened more frequently? How's this not happened before? So it really is, that's a function of better learning. If we have this kind of view of the world that we have great systems and every now and then our people mess them up, well then events will always be seen as some kind of impossible aberration. Someone screwed something up and it should never have happened. But when we really understand that our systems are always imperfect, they're always breaking down and getting worse over time, and our people generally make them work most of the time, then when we have that understanding, yeah, it becomes almost normal. Wow, it's incredible this event hasn't happened before. Our people do an amazing job to prevent this from happening more often. What do we need to do to improve? How do we improve the work? How do we make it less likely we're going to get this outcome? So that's a little bit of an overview of event learning review. I know we've taken a very quick kind of fly through some of the key aspects of the process there. If you're interested in knowing more, you can go to our website. We have just launched a course on event learning review. We'll have dates going up very soon for both face-to-face and virtual. Of course, it's ready to go. If you want this in-house, this is something you can absolutely jump straight onto right away. So please get in touch with us. We have a range of free guides already available on our website. So this QR code will take you to those resources. So you can feel free to download all the existing resources. We do have some new ones in the works as well, including one on event learning review. So keep an eye on this tab and on our website, hoplab.org, to be able to grab those resources or anything else further. So watch this space. There will be more things coming. I guess at this point in time, it makes sense to go over to questions and chat. So if you do have any questions or if there's anything you're curious about, please feel free to put that up into the feed now.
Couple coming through now. How is this different to learning teams that Bob talks about? Obviously, Bob Edwards reference there. Andy, did you want to answer that one first?
So I think one of the difference is here is obviously learning teams is a tool, much the same as event learning review is a tool. I think the philosophy is very, very similar. The skills that we're looking for from a facilitator of either tool are very similar. The differences are obviously in implementation and action. Learning teams, by definition, are getting a team of people together in a room where we're having that conversation, a structured conversation, facilitated conversation, which necessarily is including 4 or 5 people, probably at least in that first session, likewise the second session. And that's where your data is coming in into both those 2 sessions, and obviously you're organizing that and then taking action afterwards. Learning review doesn't require that sort of, let's get a whole group of people sat together in a room. So it's more of a direct replacement for an investigation, but it's taking those same sort of learning teams approaches, same sorts of questions, but is using them in a slightly different way. So highly complementary to learning teams. It's just a different vehicle, and will be better suited to some events.
Awesome. Next one that's come through. Does incorporating this new concept in our company process not add more work for our safety manager?
Shouldn't do. It shouldn't do, because pretty much any safety manager is already going to have some sort of process in place for doing investigations. This is going to simply be replacing that activity, which is something they're probably already doing anyway. One of the things conversation I have a lot with clients is, you're doing too many investigations, and the quality of investigations are suffering anyway. So just one organization I'm speaking to recently, they're doing 60 a month. This is a large organization, but still 60 a month. You can't do 60 of anything per month, and it really be truly effective. So it should be seen as this is a way of being more disciplined with our resources, rather than setting a target, we're going to do this many, or every event that hits this criteria, it has to be done. Whether you do event learning review or not, that's something that I'd be pushing back on any organization is, are you really getting maximum bang for your buck from the investigations you're doing right now? And one of the things to be looking at is, how many are we doing? So I hope that kind of taps into that question.
Great. Next one from Mark Cooper. What does a report out look like, please?
So the report looks very similar to what we would come up with on our learning team report. So, which is very much organized around the learn, define, improve. So we do all of the learning first, then we kind of, through that defining phase, come up with the key themes. So we use those key themes, whether it's 5, 6, 7, 8 key themes, whatever it is that comes out of the learning team. They become like the headers, essentially. Then all of your learning and all the context-rich information that relates to each of those themes is organized under each one of those key themes, and then along with proposed actions and improvements under each of those key themes. So that's what a learning team report looks like. So event learning review is not that dissimilar. The only difference is it has up front, it has like an event description, which is very much just focused on the event. This is what happened. These are the people involved, et cetera, much the same as you would have in an investigation report. The difference is then how all the rest of the information is passed up and how it's presented, which is very much in keeping with that learn, define, improve. But if you want to email me, I'm happy to send through an example.
Awesome. Next question that came through. Since we still have to use traditional investigating process to satisfy regulatory requirements, and clients who still want to see pre-concisions failures. So I'm not sure if I read that out correctly, but obviously, yeah, addressing that age-old question of how do we get around this from the regulatory perspective?
So it really depends on your jurisdiction that you're in. Obviously, there's a bit of a global audience on here, so I can't speak to every jurisdiction. In most places, investigations are not a regulatory requirement. Yes, there is an expectation, oftentimes driven by clients or by other interested stakeholders, that investigations will happen. Of course, we have an obligation to manage risk, and when we have an event, that's obviously going to tie straight back into our risk management processes, but there is no obligation. There is no specific term that says you will do an investigation and you will use this methodology. And in the vast majority of jurisdictions that we've worked in, and where we've seen people have changed the way they're doing their learning after events, there's actually been very little pushback from regulators. Directly engaging with regulators can be helpful, But there's certainly, to my knowledge, I've never seen anywhere where it says you must use this methodology to do an investigation. So it often is a case of being proactive, working with your suppliers, working with, your clients, working with your regulators. And when they see the outcomes, the improved outcomes, I'll be surprised if you have any pushback.
Another one came through. There's quite a few Q&As now. This is a good one. When will be an appropriate time frame to review actions from previous events? So looking at time frames.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it ultimately comes down to having to make a decision. And any decision can end up looking arbitrary. The decision that's been made has been 6 or 12 months, depending on the event type. And that's with the client I mentioned before. I think minimum 6 months, because you don't really know how effective something's going to be until you've actually given it some time to bed in. I guess the argument could be, well, if it's any longer than that, potentially, if it's ineffective and you're leaving it that long to find out, that's potentially a risk. And I acknowledge that. But equally, if you're going down next month, it's probably too soon. So you're going to have to try and give something some time to work through and then really get a feel for it, how effective it is or not. That's not to say you can't be doing more or less formal activities. Like, I would always be encouraging any safety professional or any operations person to, when you're out on the shop floor or out in the field, you can have that conversation, right? Hey, how's that change going? How's that new PPE feeling for you? Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a set event, even though we do want to have that set event to circle back and ensure we close the loop.
Perfect. This is a great one too. Who are you asking the operational learning questions to/of in a learning event review?
So good question. So much the same as a learning team. The people involved in the event, for sure, they're critical, or the people who do that work. So does that mean everyone's going to agree always? Not necessarily. But I'm really interested in trying to build that picture of what a normal day looks like, what the challenges are, where the rubs are, what are the things that make it difficult to get the job done, what are the things they rely on, what are the kind of key capacities, I guess, for success, and what are the constraints that are making it harder to achieve that success. So the people closest to the work are the people who are going to be involved. That's not to say there might not be the people you want to, most investigations, they have people who are like maybe involved in the event, and obviously then you have background witnesses and managers and other people as well. So that's, again, the freedom. You don't have to have all these people in the room at the same time, which is the advantage of this approach versus, say, for example, learning teams.
Someone said thank you, so we'll just say thank you back. Kiri asked a great question. You can pop down and talk to her, Andy. Kiri works in our office. But what are the timeframes between learning review and improvement review?
So event learning review is the name of the overarching process, and that takes as long as it takes. On a client-by-client basis, people work out different timeframes. So that really does depend. In terms of improvement review, that I think we can answer that in the previous question, where it's either typically 6 or 12 months tends to be where we're landing in terms of going back and reviewing the effectiveness. I'd probably be leaning more towards 6 months, but in that sort of time frame.
Awesome. Hi, Josh Bryant. Josh Bryant's popped in a question. Hope he's still online. Hi, Andy. Does the Southpack training for event learning focus on the facilitation of the process, or is it just on the process itself? So great question from Josh around our new course.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. That's a really good question. It's a bit of both, but for me, one of the hang-ups with other approaches is they're very interested in their process. This is our process, and this is how you have to do it. And it's making sure it's very rigorous around making sure you apply our process correctly. This process is more fluid to begin with anyway. So we're a lot more interested in kind of developing the right types of facilitation skills, the sort of asking the right sorts of questions. So we're as interested, if not maybe more interested, in the facilitation of the process as we are in the actual process itself. And that's, again, why we see the kind of people we're looking for who are going to be really good at this are people who are probably already doing things like learning teams already. So yeah, it's for some clients, we were already running these side-by-side learning teams and event learning review training. So they lean on each other very much.
Awesome. Hopefully that answers it for you, Josh. And yeah,
If not, just reach out.
We'll be at the Global Safety Innovation Summit next week as well, so we might see a few of you around there. A lot of our HOPLAB team are heading down, and we'd definitely love to talk more about event learning review, our course, what people think would be helpful. I mean, we always adapting our products and services as well. So this is a new tool. We'd love to hear your ideas from everyone as well. So come and chat to us at the summit if you see us around next week.
Thanks very much, everybody. Appreciate you joining us for this session. Stay posted. We have another new series that's going to be starting in March. So we'll hopefully look forward to seeing you then.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.